Then you start to really look at your life and your situation and your business, and you're like, oh, you know what? If I just focus on this 20%, this is actually working. The challenge with it, Mark, is that a lot of times we don't start to get the results from focusing on the 20% until we start dropping pieces at 80%. And just human nature, we tend to want to hold on to all of it until we get a guarantee that the 20% is going to work. Then we'll drop to 80. We want it to be smooth, but usually it doesn't work that way. And let's say I meet somebody in the elevator and somehow it comes up that I write books and they say, are you on Amazon? It's always the first question. When I tell someone, anytime I mention that I've written a book, the first question is, are you on Amazon? So they're going to go look me up on Amazon. So you need to be there because it gives you credibility that your book is actually on there. But I never, ever send anybody to buy my book on Amazon, only to and I make dedicated, like you said, a branded page for a URL for every book.
Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectors, and welcome to episode 379 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. In today's episode, I have an interview with Dre Baldwin. Dre Baldwin, a 9-year professional basketball player, is the CEO and founder of Work Your Game, Inc. He has given numerous TEDxTalks and authored 35 books. His online content has been consumed over 103 million times. His daily Work on Your Game MasterClass has amassed over 2,900 episodes and over 7.3 million listeners. And his framework for helping others is the roadmap in reverse for professional mindset, strategy, systems, and accountability. We talk about that. We talk about his advice, the simplification he helps others with, his books, his mindset, and more. And all of that's coming up later in this episode. But first, let's hear a word about this episode's sponsor. This episode is sponsored by the book co-authored by my colleagues, Maddie Dalrymple and Michael Aron. From Page to Platform, How to Succeed as an Author-Speaker. Now, if you're new to public speaking, the idea of facing an audience can be scary. After all, it's a far cry from the way most of us writers take comfort in the solitude of stringing words together from behind the safety of a keyboard. But don't worry, Maddie and Michael have got you covered. They share tips to help you prepare and plan, and offer advice on enhancing your speaker toolkit and continuing to improve. Each section of the book ends with practical exercises to work through as part of helping you set the stage for your own goals and your own success. You'll find From Page to Platform in ebook, print, and AI-narrated audio on the major online retailers, and you can find more information at theindieauthor.com/platform, and that's indie with a Y. I was so honored to get to write the foreword for this awesome book and also to interview Maddie and Michael about the book, which I recently did just a few days ago. Now, that interview, because of the queue I have with interviews, is not going to be coming out, maybe it'll come out in a month or so. But the raw video of the chat, because, I think it's really awesome and I'm excited to share, the raw video of that chat is going to be loaded over at patreon.com/starkreflections so that the awesome patrons who support this podcast via Patreon and via buymeacoffee.com/markleslie can check it out several weeks ahead of everyone else. That's something I love to do, to offer my patrons a little bit extra for the support that you provide to me. Now, once that episode of the interview goes live in the regular podcast feed, that video will be made publicly available so everyone can check it out if that's what you prefer. But again, I like to offer my patrons a little bit extra, a little bit something for the amazing support they give me. And again, a huge thanks to everyone who supports the podcast over at patreon.com/starkreflections. Now for some comments. Over on Twitter/X, Beth C says, I finished listening to episode 378 and was reminded of when my extended family got together to write lyrics for the Nutcracker Suite. My grandpa was principal at an elementary school, and they wanted to put on a classic musical. This is great. So, Beth, thank you for that. Now, Beth is referring to that episode where I was interviewing Dominician Gennari, and he's a writer and also a musician, and he was sharing some of his family memories of the family singing in the kitchen, which obviously, thank you so much, Beth, for sharing that reflection of the family getting together to write lyrics. Again, I love that. I love that togetherness. I love the two elements of community in that. So you have the element of community of your extended family, your grandpa and family, working on lyrics for the Nutcracker Suite, but then also putting on that musical, at the school and the community was a different community. So there were multiple layers of community, and I absolutely love community. I love community, and I love hearing what you guys are reflecting on when you're listening to the podcast. So thank you so much, Beth, for sharing your own reflection. You can share your reflections with me. You can email me, mark@markleslie.ca. You can comment over at starkreflections.ca. You can also leave comments over on the YouTube channel where the audio gets posted every week in the podcast feed, or even on Twitter/X at Mark Leslie. And I purposely, just to let you know, if Elon Musk basically can't be bothered to recognize the names when people want to change their identity or their pronouns, well, I refuse to respect his wishes to call it that new stupid name for his platform. I'm going to use the dead name because he killed the platform practically, Twitter. But of course, I have way too many actions going on Twitter. And the other thing too is I like to pay attention to what's going on outside of my own echo chamber. And so Twitter is yet one of the places where I can actually see some of the conversations that may not be conversations that I normally get engaged in, but I can at least see what's going on in those various feeds, because I don't want to just shut down and not be listening to other things. Just like in publishing, I am not in an echo chamber of just self-publishing or just traditional publishing. I think writers can benefit from understanding a little bit about each of those worlds so they can understand that. And this is a teaser for what's coming up in this episode. My guest, Dre, he talks about that. He talks about self-publishing. He talks about working with a traditional publisher, and he talks about the good and the not so good about those things as well. But that's coming up. That is coming up. Let's just play a quick bumper, and then we'll get into the aforementioned interview. So I'm really not sure what happened here, but for some reason I jumped to the comments. I had a really great segue I was so proud of. I realized, oh my God, I have the personal update thingy. So we're going to do the personal update and then get to the awesome interview. Yeah, that's what we'll do. Okay, so very short personal update. As I've been tracking my Kickstarter, it ended on September 10th, Tuesday, September 10th, around noon Eastern. And I came in at, I think it was about $40 shy of $5,000 Canadian. And $5,000 Canadian was my next stretch goal. But it shut down, but I did take advantage of something that is available on Kickstarter now that wasn't available before. And that is allowing late pledges. So you can close the Kickstarter down. There's certain things I had to close down because I needed to, to put people's names in the book and stuff like that. I needed to get stuff to press. But there are other rewards, such as the digital rewards, that are easier to deliver, such as the ebook delivery for One Hand Screaming, but also ebook delivery for several of my Canadian Werewolf books in either audiobook or ebook form, and some of my books for writers. There's the great bundle available still for way cheaper than you can get it at retail. Three of my books, The 7 P's of Publishing Success, An Author's Guide to Working with Libraries and Bookstores, and Publishing Pitfalls for Authors, as well as the one-on-one consultations that I'm doing. So those will probably stay open for another couple weeks, just to give people who want to take advantage of those an opportunity. But again, if you're thinking of running a Kickstarter, that's an important thing to understand, is that, yeah, I needed to close it down so I could get some things to press and stuff like that, because I need to get stuff to my printers so I could get the books delivered to the distribution warehouse in Canada, and I need to have books in stock to ship out to and sign, of course, to people who have backed this Kickstarter campaign. But of course, I've got book events coming up, including a launch that I'm planning right now for October 2nd at Counterpoint Brewing, a tie-in beer and the book together. So I'm meeting tomorrow. I'll be meeting on Friday the 13th with Graham from Counterpoint, just to finalize a few of those things. So some of the beer glasses that we are making for the beer itself, the labels for the beer, and getting all of that prepared, because then the beer will be available in the first week of October. But anyway, so that's what's been occupying so much of my time. I have so many projects, so much other work that has had to take a bit of a backseat to this. And I'm so eager to get on with these other projects, but there's still so many elements of the Kickstarter that I'm still working on and still putting together. So many of the digital rewards and other things that aren't quite finalized. So my days are long and my nights are longer as I try to continue to chip away at all of these backlog pieces of work, as well as the ongoing stuff that I am still doing, such as my work with Draft to Digital, as well as my working with helping other writers and the one-on-one consultations, and of course the free consultations that I do, not to mention the stuff I do on various social media, a lot of it on Wide for the Win. Speaking of which, Wide for the Win podcast has been relaunched, the Wide Stream we called it. It's a live video chat that will take place at 4 o'clock Eastern every week on the Wide for the Win YouTube channel. I'll have a link to that in the show notes. But of course, I'm the main host and producer of that podcast. So again, as if I didn't have enough on my plate, that is not bringing in income, that takes up a lot of extra time, etc. That Wide for the Win, which is a company that we founded, it is a company I invested in and put money into and continue to put money into, but I think it's a long-term investment. So getting that podcast up and serving the wide author community is an important thing. So that's one of the reasons why I invest so much time and energy in that. Again, I'm thinking about the long term. And just like this podcast, yes, I have amazing patrons who support the podcast and sponsors, so I can get some revenue for that. Of course, that revenue at this point in time is relatively moderate. It's not something that I can basically count as a sole source of income, and definitely does not cover the hours that I put into the podcast, but that's okay. I'm not complaining about that. I'm just saying that I recognize that this is a long-term slow build. I've only been doing this podcast every week without missing a single Friday, and I'm in my 7th year. So this is the 7th year of doing that consistently, and I know it's not a short game thing. It is something I'm deeply passionate about doing. I feel like the podcast is actually helping to inspire and inform authors, also letting authors know that they're not alone, because in my personal updates I often share the frustrations and struggles and hurdles and trips and falls that I often make on my own writer journey. Just a reminder, and again, that's why I like those reflections. That's why I like engaging with the community, because we're all in this together. But that was meant to be a really short personal update, and as often happens, because I do this unscripted, I just rambled. I hope you found something somewhat useful in those ramblings. But you know what I know you're going to find useful? You're going to find this interview I did with Dre Baldwin very interesting. And that, my friends, is coming up right after this slightly longer, slightly different bumper. Hey, Dre, welcome to this Dark Reflections podcast.
Excited to be here, Mark. Thanks for having me on.
I am so thrilled to have you on. You've done so many different things, have so many different products. What's the thing that's on your mind lately? What's the thing that you're recently been focusing on trying to help people with?
Really, the biggest thing is just making sure that people are simplifying. So when you're faced with a challenge, what a lot of us have been conditioned to do is to figure out ways to do more effort, more time, more ideas. When a lot of times the thing that will work for us, we're already doing. We just have too many other things going on at the same time. So the simplification process is just about what we're willing to eliminate, not necessarily about what we need to add.
Wow. Okay. So I love that idea. So how did you first discover that as a solution rather than just, okay, I'm going to double down, notes the grindstone. I'm going to do everything. I'm going to do twice as much. How
Right.
did that revelation come about?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, not that putting more time in and doubling down and nose to the grindstone is necessarily bad. I mean, my whole thing is called work on your game. So I can't sit here and say hard work doesn't matter. All right, it does
Right.
matter.
Yeah.
All right, when you're doing the right type of hard work. And to answer your actual question, Mark, it's not that there was some light bulb moment, some eureka moment for me when it actually hit me, but it's kind of just over time, you just accumulate these little pieces. So all of us are familiar with the 80-20 principle. 80% of your results come from 20% of your inputs. And everyone logically agrees with that. And if you ask a room full of people, do you believe in that? Everybody says yes. But then you look at how we operate, we're not using it. So it's just a matter of we have to have it. You just need to hear it from different angles, different times until eventually it starts to make sense. And then you start to really look at your life and your situation and your business. And you're like, oh, you know what? If I just focus on this 20%, this is actually working. The challenge with it, Mark, is that a lot of times we don't start to get the results from focusing on the 20% until we start dropping pieces at 80%. And just human nature, we tend to want to hold on to all of it until we get a guarantee that the 20% is going to work. Then we'll drop to 80. We want it to be smooth, but usually it doesn't work that way.
So what then are some of the, I love that too. What then are some of the ways you can identify what's in that 80%? Because sometimes when
Mhm.
we look at stuff and we have plans and goals, sometimes we maybe not be able to see that ourselves, right?
Right. So the first thing is, what is the goal? That's the first question I ask anyone who comes to me with a question or a challenge. What are you looking to achieve? Because I don't want to assume that your goal is something that is not, because then I would give you faulty advice because you're not trying to go where I think you're trying to go. So the first
Yeah.
thing is, where are you trying to go? What are you trying to achieve? And when you're clear on that, so let's say someone's goal is they want to make as much money as possible. Okay, if that's your goal, okay, now let's look at your client list. Let's look at your customers and the products that you're selling. Which ones can produce the most money in the shortest period of time? And now we can start focusing. Once we have a goal, then we can at least start to cut some things out and we can start to do more of certain things. But until we know the goal, nothing can happen. And the challenge that a lot of humans have these days, Mark, is because we are inundated with so many messages and so many different ideas from so many different people all day, every day. They're going after more than one priority, which is an oxymoron. You can't have more than one priority. Right? A priority is a priority. It's one thing,
Right,
singular.
right.
And that's where people they start to confuse themselves.
Cool, cool. No, I appreciate you started off with some tips for me. I'm actually going to
Mhm.
roll it back a little bit because I wanted people to see some of the great content, some of the great advice that you have. Let's talk about work on the game. Let's talk about that book. But before we get into that book, I'm a little bit curious to find out your background as a creative person, as a mentor, as somebody who likes to inspire others. Where did all that creativity and inspiration begin for you?
It really began as well. First of all, I've always been a big reader. My mom was an educator, so she had my sister and I reading from a really early age. So I was always into reading books, even back before you can get the books on the phone. You had to actually go to the bookstore. And then what happened was, well, the internet came around right around the time that I was getting out of college and I started to play sports, but I would be on the internet because I've always been a bit of, I guess you say, a closet computer geek on top of the fact that I was an athlete. So when social media started to be a thing, or not even social media, just media, self-generated media. So where you can blog, you have your own blog, or you can get on social media platforms and post whatever you want on your profiles. Once
Yeah.
I saw that, I had always known that I had a different way of thinking about things than most people, just people in my immediate environment, like my classmates, my teammates, etc. And I had the ability to explain it. I could articulate why I thought differently. So when I saw blogging and the internet and what it was going to become, I knew it was for me because it was a place where I could have my own platform, say what I wanted to say, and get my point across. If anybody, if I could find people who wanted to listen. So that's where it started. And then once I started talking about, really, I was talking to athletes because I was playing basketball professionally and I was putting videos on YouTube just about basketball. And the players started asking questions about their development as players. So I started explaining to them the mindset and the growth and the development and all the pieces you need mentally to match with what you were doing physically. And when I started explaining it, the player said, hey, your ability to explain this is really, it's unique, it's different, and it's really valuable, even better than the basketball stuff. And Mark, the other thing that happened was people who didn't play basketball started hearing it. So I was just publishing this on YouTube, and they would say, hey, this stuff applies to me, and I don't even play sports. So that's when I started to find out, oh, this piece right here is what I can build everything on, even if I don't play a sport anymore. And that was about 15 years ago. So that's where it started.
So 15 years ago, that was when you were doing YouTube videos and started blogging and stuff like that. And that's when potentially it was like, hey, I can adapt this for other people, not just sports folks, not sports folks. Athletes is the word. I need my thesaurus, apparently.
Well, I started putting content out 20 years ago when it started.
Whoa,
I found
really?
Yeah, about 2005. I graduated college in 2004. I started playing professional sports 2005, and the mindset stuff started to come out around 2009, 2010. So that's when I found out, okay, now I can take this piece, and when I'm done with sports, I can still provide value by talking about just this part alone, because I saw how valuable it was to people. I thought everybody thought like this, but I realized everybody didn't. So that's when I saw there was value. So it was about 2010.
So this was as a person who was coaching other athletes, the mindset element was one of the unique elements that you pulled out and started with. But that, we were talking earlier, that mindset could potentially adapt for writers, right? For listeners of my podcast. They're different kind of athletes who kind of do a lot more with these digits here rather than their arms and legs.
Yeah, so a couple things. So I was guiding the athletes. I wasn't really coaching them. I was just guiding them through the internet, just through my videos, and then I would sell them.
So this wasn't one-on-one coaching. This was just you inspiring the masses. Okay,
right. All right. So I was just putting videos on social media, or YouTube, if you want to call that social media, and I had an audience of basketball players mostly, and then it started to become a bit more diverse of an audience, because people who didn't play sports started hearing the mindset videos. They were ignoring the basketball videos, but they saw the mindset videos and they liked it. So that's how I started to build my audience, period. And that was around the same time that I started, writing more. And I was already blogging, but then I started putting out books, and, self-publishing was a thing. And I've done traditional and self-publishing. I'm sure we'll talk about that. But that's where that started. And the players, when they would ask about mindset, because they realized two things. Number one, that just having the physical tools without the mindset, it wasn't connecting. They still weren't getting the results. So they figured there's something missing here. Can you help me with the other piece? Which I did. And the other thing was they found out about my background. And when they just started asking me about myself, and I would explain just the way that I thought and how I went about certain things, they got more interested and said, well, can you talk about that piece a little bit more? And that's kind of how it started to evolve. People just getting curious.
Oh, wow. Okay. So let's talk about some of those key factors of mindset. You talked about goal. So it's always important to first, I think, lay the foundation and understand what your goals are, because I think everything after that's kind of related to how does this feed the goal. But what's one of the first mindset principles that maybe a lot of people miss when they're looking at their own plans?
Well, the foundation of it, from my angle, is discipline. Discipline is the most important piece. And I said that discipline is the hallmark of the professional. And from discipline, you get consistency, you get predictability, you get preparation, all the things that you would expect in a professional. That they are, what you're going to get from them. You can pretty much predict what they're going to do in a good way. And they're usually prepared before the situation occurs. And all of those are results of discipline. The challenge is not that people don't understand the concept of discipline, Mark, because most people want it. If you ask most people on the street, do you want more discipline in any aspect of your life? Everybody will say yes. They usually laugh at themselves and say, yeah, I need to be more disciplined. I need to go to the gym. I need to start my podcast. I need to finish writing that book. All right. That's what people say that all the time. And the reason why people know they need discipline but still don't have it is because people don't know how to go about getting it. And discipline is a byproduct of structure. And that's the part that a lot of people are missing. When you have the proper structure in place, discipline happens almost naturally. But many people don't follow a structure, or if they're trying to follow a structure, Mark, they get thrown off of their structure by these constant distractions from things like this all day, every day. So people aren't following. Oh, I'm holding up my phone, by the way, people listening. So that's how people get thrown off of their structures. Not that there isn't one out there, or not that you can't get one off Google. It's just that people don't follow it because they allow themselves so easily to get distracted.
So, looking at structure then, so structure gives you a good foundation
Mm.
for adapting the discipline. I guess what I wonder, are there different structures for different types of people or different types of goals?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So anything that someone wants to achieve, there's a structure that can help you achieve it. And someone has probably already figured it out. As long as you're looking to do something that some human on the planet has already done, which
Right.
most of us are, then there's some type of structure that can work. Now, maybe one structure works for me and one structure works for you. So let's say if we both want to get in great physical shape, well, for me, it might be basketball, it might be going to the boxing gym, and for you, it might be swimming and playing tennis. All right, there are different approaches, but there's a structure to swimming, there's a structure to tennis, there's a structure to basketball, there's a structure to boxing. So you just have to find the structure that works for you, but there needs to be a structure.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I guess the difference, for example, between swimming and tennis, well, with swimming, solo is one of the things. So the timing isn't dependent upon other people. Whereas
Right.
tennis, I mean, unless you've got the machine or the wall to play against, which I used to do
Right.
as an only child, as a kid
Mhm.
playing up against the school wall just to practice tennis.
Right.
But yeah, I guess some of the structure does depend on the type of activity you're doing, and I guess maybe the things you're dependent upon for making it happen.
Yes, and it depends on, again, we got to go back to the goal, because if you're playing tennis just to get a sweat and burn some calories, then yes, you can play against the wall. But if you're playing tennis because maybe you want to get a little bit better and compete on the weekends, then you might need a coach, and the
Right.
coach provides the structure, right? Or
Right.
if you want to swim for exercise, but you don't know how to swim, then you may need an instructor who can teach you how to swim. So it
Yeah.
depends on what the goal is. So again, we always come back to what's the outcome that you're looking to get, because two people can be on the tennis court, but with completely different goals for completely different reasons.
Yeah. Oh, wow. So I love that. So I guess when writers are looking at the structure, maybe it has to do, well, obviously starting with the goals, but looking at, I'm working full time right now, and maybe my goal is I want to be a full time writer. So what do I need to
Mhm.
do? What path do I need to set? And maybe what that's probably a lot having to do with your calendar, right? And blocking off time.
Yes, and I think it more has to do with the goal. And we're going to come right back. It more has to do with the goal, because let's say you're working full time and you're writing on the side, but you want to be able to write full time and maybe drop the job completely. Then you still have to treat your side hustle as if it's a full time business, which doesn't necessarily mean giving 40 hours a week, because you don't
Right.
have it. But it does mean that there needs to be a structure in place, which means if you have an hour a day, then during that hour, that really means an hour. It really means it starts at 7 o'clock and it ends at 8 o'clock. And it really means you're committed to writing 1,000 words a day. And you have to hold yourself accountable to that structure, because that's what a true professional does. True professionals are consistent because they're consistent in their output, because they're consistent in their inputs. You don't just roll out of bed and do that off of talent or by happenstance. You do it by design. That's what professionals do. They have a design, and design is another form of structure. Right? So you put the right structure in place and you start doing it. It seems like clockwork and it seems natural when you're watching it. But if you knew what was going on in the background, it would make perfect sense.
Okay, all right. See, I keep going back and thinking. I'm a fan, a child of the '80s, and so that was my formative years as a young teenager. And I think about Mr. Miyagi teaching Daniel
Yeah,
the moves, and
exactly.
it was muscle memory of wax on and wax off, which seemed
Right.
like he was abusing a kid and, and getting free work from him. But
Right.
that ended up being that repetitive move, that muscle memory that ended up helping him in the grander scheme of karate.
Yes, exactly. So he was doing it through I guess he just used a metaphor
Yeah,
of you're gonna clean this stuff and that's how you're gonna learn the movement, but he could have just as easily took him in the gym and said, do this movement over and over again. All right. He just
yeah,
gave him
yeah.
something else to distract his mind, but it was doing the exact same thing. But the teacher had a structure, and that's one of the shortcuts here that we can talk about, Mark. The shortcut is getting with someone who has already figured out the structure, so you don't have to
Right.
go through a bunch of trial and error trying to figure it out on your own.
Yeah, so rather than stumbling through the dark, you've actually have a mentor who's going to guide you, and maybe
Exactly.
not necessarily guide you in a way that you initially understand. Does that happen sometimes
Of course.
when someone's working with a mentor?
Of course, because if you're going and getting help from someone, they often, it's not all the time, but often they know a whole bunch of stuff that you don't know, especially if you're brand new at a thing. So that's a
Right.
big jump. Let's say you've never done a thing, you're an amateur, but then you work with someone who's been doing it for a long time and taught a bunch of people. Well, they're going to teach you a whole lot of things that you didn't know anything about. Now, at the same time, a high level professional, and I know a lot of them, they still go get coaches too, because what they're looking for is just that little slight edge that can help them get just a little bit of an edge against, let's say, the competition, or just become a little bit better than who they already are. But you also notice at the highest level of performance, let's take sports, for example, every professional athlete has a coach, every single one of them. And the reason that they have a coach is not because they're not good, but because having that coach is what keeps them good. Because
Right.
without the coach, they're human just like everybody else. They can fall off the wagon because they don't have anything holding them in place and keeping them accountable.
Yeah, so that accountability, I think, is one of those elements, and I think that's one of the things writers often see themselves as solo artists. That yeah,
Mhm.
I can do this on my own. I don't need whatever. But I think accountability tends to be something that comes up a lot as an important element for writers.
Absolutely, for any professional, because human beings, in my experience, Mark, they tend to do better and more consistent work when we know we're being looked over, when we know we're being watched over. And
Okay.
watched over, not like a shepherd in sheep, but I mean, is somebody is going to see what we're doing and we're going to have to tell them, hey, this is what I did, this is why, this is what I didn't do, and here's why. Because we start to get embarrassed of 3 conversations in a row, you say you didn't do anything. All right. So what's the
Right.
point?
Right.
What are we doing? All
Yeah.
right. So that accountability piece matters a lot. I find a lot of human beings will do more for others, even if it just means pleasing your coach, than they will do for themselves.
Oh, that's interesting. It almost feels like in many ways there's that external gratification of, okay,
That's
coach
right.
is happy, therefore I'm happy. I know
That's
I
right.
need it with my own deadlines. If I have an editor I've hired or a publishing contract, I want to make sure that I don't miss my deadline because if it was just
Mm.
me, who cares, right? I'll figure it
Right.
myself.
Yeah, exactly. And we tend to, I tell people, show yourself the same respect you would show your boss or your parents, or if you played a sport, your coach, or if you were in the military, your superior. All right, the same respect you would show to that person. If they gave you something and said, "Had this done by Thursday," you would have it done by Thursday. But we tell ourselves to have something done by Thursday, and here it is Saturday, and we still haven't done it. And we can laugh it off because, again, who are we holding ourselves accountable to? Just the person in the mirror, and nobody else knows about it. So we don't have a problem with not respecting or not holding ourselves accountable, but we usually are much more accountable when another human is involved.
So are there ways for for people to hold themselves accountable the way they hold themselves accountable to others? Are there any techniques or sort of procedures maybe that help
Mhm.
you with that?
Yeah, well, there's a whole lot of procedures, but before a procedure even matters, we got to go back to that golden question here, Mark. What's the goal? Now, what is
Okay.
the goal, and what do you want, and why do you want it? Those are the two big questions, because what you're asking for is how do we do it?
Right.
Right. And what I tell people, you got the what, you got the how, and you got the why. And most people slow themselves down and don't do anything when they are unclear on the how. How do I do this?
Yeah.
Most content online is about how, right? But if you know what you want, you have a clear outcome, and you know why you want it, which is the emotional, internal reason why it matters to you, the drive, the motivation, whatever you want to call it. Those two build the bridge because they're like magnets connected to each other. In between them becomes the bridge of how do I do it. When you're really clear on what you want, you're really clear on why you want it, and it's a strong enough reason, then the how starts to show itself. But you find most people spend most of their days and most of their lives looking around for how do I do a thing when there's a million different ways to do it. And that's one of the challenges, because when you're trying to do something that has a million different ways to do it, you get confused and analysis paralysis, because there's so many different options that you can choose. And this is the reason why, again, having a big goal and a really compelling goal is actually better, because the bigger the goal, the fewer hows that are even possible to make it happen.
Right.
Because if I'm trying to make $100 in a day, there's a lot of different ways I can do that. But if I say I want to make $1 million in a day, it's only a few ways I can do that. So there are fewer options. So I spend less time deciding which one I'm going to take because I don't have so many to choose from. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
I mean, yeah, immediately by narrowing, like by expanding the goal, narrowing down the options, that reduces
Right.
that paralysis you talked about
Correct.
as well. Cool. So you had mentioned you've worked with traditional publishers. You've also taken the DIY approach. Let's talk a little bit about your publishing history. And was it a matter with a publisher of you already had a huge social media following, so it was pretty much, hey, look, I have an audience. Like, how did you seek out that publishing contract?
Yeah, so no, it didn't happen that way. So I'll tell
Okay,
you how it
they didn't
happened.
come knocking down your door offering you
They
six
did
figures
not.
or anything.
No,
Okay,
that did not happen. I wish they did. They didn't. So I knew that I wanted to write a book probably back maybe after my college years. I said, I like writing. I like reading. I like writing. So I'd always been blogging. And I had a blog before I even had a YouTube channel, but my blog didn't get a whole bunch of fans.
yeah,
So once I saw that I had something on the internet, like I had this audience and now what we call a personal brand, we weren't using that phrase back then.
yeah,
But once I realized that I had one and I knew that I could write and I knew I had something to say that was unique, I knew I wanted to write a book, but I understood how the book publishing process worked roughly, which was you had to go through you got to go through a publishing company, and the publishing company only talks to you if you have an agent. So I got to basically sell myself to an agent. Then the agent has to sell me to the publishing company, and then there's all this back and forth. And then maybe one day your book will come out. And I didn't want to go through all that, so I never pursued it. I think I might have reached out to maybe a publisher or two, but I got pretty much what everybody gets. Say, if you're not with an agent, we're not even taking your call. Was pretty much what happened. But
right.
I didn't pursue it strongly. But around that 2010 period, that's when I found out self-publishing was a thing. I don't remember where I first heard it, but somebody was saying, hey, you can go on Amazon and you can write a book. You just upload the manuscript. You had a whole book out. So I wrote my first book in about 2010. It's the only book of mine that's a narrative. It's just my story, just about basketball when I first started up through college. So that was my first book.
What was
And
that called?
it was called Buy a Game.
Okay, is
Buy a
it
Game.
still available?
Yes, it is actually right here behind me.
Oh, there it is. Okay, cool. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
Buy
so
a Game.
we'll make sure there's
My
links
face
to
on the
that
cover.
in the show notes as well. Okay.
Sure. I give that one away for free still, so you can get the PDF for free.
There you
And okay, so I put that one out about 2010, and then again, most of my audience at this time was still mostly basketball players, but they really liked this mindset angle, so they just started to. Once I put that one out and they liked it, because a lot of athletes don't read books, so they liked that one though because I'm an athlete, so they read my book.
Right.
So then I said, oh, let me write some books about mindset. So I took the same stuff I was already talking about, like discipline, confidence, mental toughness, personal initiative. And I wrote books about each one of those. Then I wrote some books about playing basketball overseas. And I have written probably about and a lot of self-help, personal, professional development. So basically everything we're talking about, I have a book on it. And I had maybe 19, 20 books self-published by about 2017. So
wow. Okay.
what happened in 2017, I stopped playing basketball in 2015. So my first idea getting out of basketball was I was going to be a professional speaker. So what I did, Mark, was I had a mentor who was telling me the ropes. Here's how it works. Here's what you have to do. I'm just making phone calls every day. I'm sending a bunch of cold emails, making a bunch of cold calls. I made hundreds. In 2015, 16, 17, did a couple TED Talks. 2017, I got booked to speak. No pay, did not get paid. They didn't pay for my travel, didn't pay for the hotel. I live in Miami. It was in Atlanta. So I went to Atlanta. That probably cost me $2,000 that trip. Spoke on the stage. And when I got off the stage, I got 3 opportunities presented to me. One of them was from the NBA, National Basketball Association. Can you come speak to our players? Because a lot of people don't know this. They do behind the scenes, they do like career transition teaching for their players because basketball careers are very short. Yeah. So they want to give you something for what you do after you play. So they wanted me to come speak to the players for that. I did that. The NCAA, someone from there came to me, similar idea, like a motivational speech. And then a publisher from a Manhattan publisher, which was McGraw-Hill Business. She came to me and said, hey, I see that you have self-published your own books, because I gave a couple away on the stage, because the speech that I was giving was called Work on Your Game, Apply the Pro Athlete Mindset to Business. That was the speech I'd given. And she said, I see you've written a couple books on your own. Have you ever thought about working with a traditional publisher? And I said to her, yes, I have. As a matter of fact, the speech that I just gave, I want to write a book based around that speech, because I knew I wanted to write a book with just my whole philosophy in one package. So when she came to me, I said, that's the exact book that I want to write. She said, give me a call. We worked it out. I did a book with them. That book became Work on Your Game. You can see that one right over here. Yes, that became Work on Your Game. So that's how I got into the traditional publishing world. I've had other publishers come to me with inquiries like, are you interested in doing another one? And I told them, after my experience with the first one, you had to make me a Godfather offer to do it again, because the process was too slow. There's too much red tape. They were just a little bit too, I guess, conservative for me. Some of the things that I said in my book, the editors are coming back like, "Hey, you can't say this," and I'm like, "Are you serious?" Like,
Yeah.
now I probably wouldn't do it traditional again unless they gave me they would have to give me a Michelle Obama deal with a whole bunch of money up front. But other than that, no.
Then we'll talk, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. So working your game was with McGraw. I mean, and McGraw, one of the
Yes.
world's largest publishers as well, and they
Right.
do a lot of higher end academic stuff as well. So
Right.
probably a book that people are buying. Leaders are probably buying, coaches are probably buying for teams and stuff like that, just to
Mhm.
get a little piece of you when they can't afford to fly you in and have you speak to the team or something like that. So
Yeah.
you've done other books after that on
Mhm.
your own imprint. Did you create your own company, your own imprint for this? Like what was the procedure for the ones you did yourself? Apart from, okay, I have a great idea, I'm going to put this all together. There must now be a procedure that you follow when you put a book out.
Yeah, so the first ones I put out, let's say in my first years, my first 5 or so books, I just wrote them, wrote the manuscripts. I barely even proofread the books, and I just put them up on Amazon
Yeah.
and started selling. And then I got them printed. You can print your own books, and I just started selling them. And nobody ever complained about the typos because I had a dedicated audience. So
Yeah.
that's how it started, right? And now, let's say since I did work on your game with a traditional publisher, I saw their process. What I will say about traditional publishers is that the editing process is amazing because they made that book that book is very well written. I'll stand behind that book forever by the way it came out because the structure is perfect. The editor that I had, she was amazing.
Yeah.
But I just didn't like the structure of their whole system.
Right.
And what I do now is I come up with the idea. I use Google Docs. I just get it all written out. I can write a book very fast, and I can use a talk to text and get a book written. I can get a whole manuscript done in a day if I take the whole day. And then I have people who I hire out for certain things. So when it comes to editing process, when it comes to the cover design, because I'm not an artist, so the cover design and the overall jacket of the book. Then there's as far as the front matter, end matter, all of that formatting, I have those templates already in my Google Docs. So I can use the same format over and over again. And then there's a sales funnel because now what I tell people, Mark, is that I'm not in the business of writing books. I'm in the business of selling books. That's the business I'm actually in. All right, so it's not about writing the book. It's about selling the book. So who's going to actually buy this book and read it? That's actually what I'm asking when I'm writing a book. So it's putting together the sales funnel. That's not the funnel itself, but the marketing part is my aspect. That's my specialty. So getting the funnel put together, pre-orders, letting people know, hey, something's coming. I got this book coming out. I'm going to talk about A, B, C, and then getting people to actually buy the book because you and I both know, Mark, most books that get bought don't get read. People, they get them, they give them as gifts. They don't actually read the book. So if I left chapter 12 empty, nobody would know because nobody reads past chapter 2. Right. So I just want to get the book out and get it into people's hands and use that as a segue into other things that we offer. So let's say a coaching program or courses and things like that. So we use books over here basically as entry points into our world where we just want you to pull out your credit card and give us $9 for shipping. And that's just letting us know that you're someone who's interested. And now if the book's any good, or at least the first chapter that you read is any good, now you're interested into the rest of the stuff we have.
So then that sounds almost like that the direct sales off your own website, your own
Correct.
branded website
That's
is
right.
more important than ranking on Amazon, for example.
Oh, yes. I hate when somebody tells me they bought my book on Amazon. So
Yeah. You have
I'm
no
on
idea
Amazon.
who bought it, right? When they bought it,
Right.
you have no idea who bought it.
Exactly.
You can't message them. You can't say, hey, I know you got the book. Hey, you better check out chapter 12 because it's damn good. And here's a tip from chapter 12 that maybe prompts you to read it. Or
Yes.
obviously then on to some of the next products that you have available, right?
Exactly. So let's say I meet somebody in the elevator and somehow it comes up that I write books and they say, are you on Amazon? It's always the first question. When I tell someone, anytime I mention that I've written a book, the first question is, are you on Amazon? So they're going to go look me up on Amazon. So you need to be there because it gives you credibility that your book is actually on there. Yeah. But I never, ever send anybody to buy my book on Amazon, only and I make dedicated, like you said, a branded page for a URL for every book. Okay. So one book, there's a URL for Work on Your Game. There's a page just for that. The third day, there's a book just for that. So you want to send them into the funnel just for that book. And then we got a bunch of books. So I can upsell you more books. So you can get 15 books in one funnel. But what you said is the most important part because in business, the most valuable thing you have is your customer list. right? Or just your list, period. Even if they're not customers, just a list of people who have given you permission to reach out to them.
Right.
And if someone buys a book on Amazon, well, that builds Amazon's list. That doesn't build your list. So Amazon just got a customer on their list, but you didn't get a customer because you don't know who they are. Yeah. So that's why I don't like when people buy my books on Amazon. If they do, I'm like, how did they get to know that I had a book? And then why'd they go to Amazon? There's something that got messed up in the process there. They ended up going to Amazon.
Oh, I love that. Well, and that's part of the procedure too, because it's part of the process of purchase, read, enjoy the content. Now there's other content I have for you, but I can always reach out to you because I know who you are and I know that you're interested. Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Yes.
So of the various books that you have, when you think about being a writer yourself, when you think about the mindset and the challenges and the things that you had to overcome and establish to become a successful writer, what's a book that you would recommend, or a book or books that you would recommend for writers who'd be listening to this now saying, okay, I want to learn. He sounds good. I really like him, like his style. I want to learn from this guy. What would you recommend? And maybe you can give me your elevator pitch too.
Probably the most popular these days is my book called The Third Day. And The Third Day is actually a chapter in my book, Work on Your Game. So I just basically expanded on it because the third day is a concept, because Work on Your Game is basically all of it. And then we just took pieces and we branch out from it. So Third Day's subtitle is The Decision That Separates the Pros from the Amateurs. And what I find with people who want to write books, there's not a challenge for me, and may not even be for you, Mark, but most people I talk to want to write books. The challenge is actually writing the book. So I remember I was doing an event for Work on Your Game when it came out at a local bookshop down here in Miami. And someone said, what's the most important thing you need? What's the most important tool you need to write a book? And I said, Microsoft Word and Google Docs. All right, you just need to open it and write. And that's the biggest challenge. People just don't write the book. So I don't have that challenge. Again, I told you I can write a book very quickly, but most people do. So how do you show up and give the effort you're supposed to give when you don't really feel like giving it, but it is still your responsibility to give it? That's what The Third Day is all about. And I sourced that from my background in sports, because even athletes, there's a great job to be an athlete, but there are days you don't feel like practicing. There are days you don't feel like working out or training or getting in the ice tub and all of those things. But a professional shows up and delivers even when they don't feel like delivering. That's what makes you a professional. And I believe, what's the man's name? Stephen Pressfield in the War of Art. He talks about that. He calls it the resistance, right? Similar concept. You're supposed to sit down and write. You got to sit down and write. You got to fight the resistance, sit down and actually write your book. And that's what The Third Day is about. How do you systematically and strategically set yourself up to do that rather than try to willpower and push your way through it? So that's what The Third Day is about. And people can get that by going to thirddaybook.com. It's spelled out, thirddaybook.com.
Yeah, because we don't need to go to any other. We don't need no stinking Amazon. We can just get to
don't get it on Amazon.
Thirddaybook.com. And of course, I'll also have links to that in the show notes at starkreflections.ca. So that's a good book potentially for people to start with. And I love how you took an idea that was one chapter in a book and you said, okay, this needs to be expanded because I think it can help people. That's a great use of your own material in a different way, which I think is leveraging your IP in as many ways as you can. Right?
Yes, exactly. And you also have to remember that most of the people in your audience aren't hearing everything that you're saying. All right, you hear everything you say, but most of your audience doesn't hear everything you say. They get bits and pieces of it. So if you take something like a lot of our authors might say, well, I did a chapter called The Third Day in this book. Why would I write a whole book about it? They already heard me say it. Like most of them did not hear it. And even if they did, if they liked it, they will gladly listen to it again. And that's something that a lot of content creators in general, this is a mistake that a lot of them make, is they think every single thing they say has to be this brand new concept because they already said the other thing. Most of your audience didn't even hear you when you said it the first time. They didn't hear you when you said it the 8th time. So you need to say it the 9th and 10th time so they actually get it.
Oh man, you just spoke to my heart right there. I screamed some things from the rooftop because I want to help writers out. And I realized, but I've said it 100 times. Yeah, but I only heard you once.
Right. Exactly.
Awesome. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and insights with me. Can you please let my listeners know where they can find you online? And obviously when they find you, they're going to find links to all of your content, all the stuff you have available, right?
Sure. So I'm on all the social media platforms. So pick any one. I'm on all of them. Just look up my name, Dre Baldwin. So whether you like YouTube, LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, I'm on everything. So look at my name, Dre Baldwin. All of my profiles are public. And again, you can get that book just by going to thirddaybook.com. But other than that, just Google me. I'm easy to find.
Awesome. Dre, thanks so much for hanging out with me today.
Thank you for having me on, Mark. I appreciate you sharing your platform.
Okay, so many things to reflect on. I pulled out, I think, 3 or 4. I'm not sure if we're going to get through them all, but I just want to reflect on a few things from the interview with Dre. Okay, so the 2 golden questions related to your goal, and I love how he kept coming back to this as a good core foundation. What do you want, and why do you want it? I think those are really important. I would even argue that if you're not clear on that, you may want to take a step back and reflect on what do you want and why do you want it, and that could potentially help inform some of the other stuff that you're doing. So that's the first thing to reflect on. Dre called it out several times. I want to call it out again in this reflection because I think obviously it's a very key cornerstone. The other thing is a professional shows up, and I remember this, and it's so important because it's sort of like a brain surgeon that doesn't say, I don't feel like doing surgery today. I'm not going to go do my job, or almost any other profession, almost any other trade can't say, I just don't feel like it today. Now, yeah, okay, mental health days, I'm not saying that they're not important, and taking a break and doing certain things are not important, but if you are a writer, a professional writer, you need to actually be engaged in the profession of writing. And sometimes that profession is actually writing. Sometimes it's working with your editor or your designers, whatever. Sometimes it's the business aspects, the procedures and the things that you need to do to manage your author business, whether this is something you're doing part-time, which is probably most writers, or if it's something that you're engaged in full-time. You've got to show up, you've got to produce, you've got to be working on those things. But again, if you go back to that 80-20 rule, is like looking at what are those 20% of those things, and again, I think you can get to those the right 20% and get rid of some of the wrong of that 80%, which takes up so much of our time, by going back to those 2 golden questions. What do you want, and why do you want it? The other thing I really liked, and this is something that I've done a little bit of, and I plan on doing a little bit more of, and it's such a great way because it goes in line with what I recommend to authors all the time, is exploit your own IP in different ways. And so he talks about expanding upon a single chapter in one book to create a unique and specific full book, other content. So it's a really great way of saying, okay, I talked about this here, but let's dig into it in a little bit more detail. It's like this special entire episode devoted to this topic, so we can actually go beyond the surface and dig in a little more and explore it a little deeper, a little richer, because potentially that's what may be needed by some people who want to really get into it and learn it. So that focus is really important, but it's also a great way of leveraging your own IP in multiple aspects. And this kind of relates to the final reflection. And this is something that we said close to the end of the interview, is the fact that most people don't hear something you say. Repeating it and exploring it in different ways can really help. I experience that all the time, where I feel like I've shared something so many thousands of times, and so many times when I'm talking to authors, I feel like, oh my God, Mark, you're repeating yourself, for God's sake. You're getting to be that old annoying guy, like that uncle who says the same stories over and over again, or whatever that case is, around the family table at Thanksgiving or whatever. But usually in those cases where I say, oh my God, I'm sharing this advice again, I've been doing it for 10 years. I've said this thousands of times. There's always someone in the room for whom I can see their eyes light up, because it may not be the first time they've heard it, but it may be the first time that they're ready to hear it, or the first time that they've heard it and they get it. And there's a difference between just hearing information and hearing information at the right time for you on where you are in your journey. And so I try not to get frustrated saying, but I've told you this 50 times. I try not to get frustrated, because when I was telling them that, perhaps the person on the other end was not ready to hear it. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's just human nature. It's just the way we are. So when you have something of value and importance to share, it's okay to repeat it. I learned this during my Kickstarter. I felt like I was oversharing my Kickstarter every day on social media. And there were some people who I felt like, oh my God, every day I'm sharing something about it. And there were tons of people who came in and said, no, this is the first time I saw it, actually. Or I did have some very gracious, very kind people say, yeah, you did share it, but it was always entertaining the way that you shared it. You didn't just do the same thing over and over again. You tried different approaches, and there were some different humor. And I took some stabs at myself and sort of poked fun at myself for oversharing. And then I had other people saying you didn't share nearly enough. So again, you may be sharing something that you think is of value, and you may feel like you've repeated it, but chances are people haven't necessarily heard it, or they weren't ready to hear it. So it may be okay to share that again in the future. So those are my reflections for this interview, for this episode. What are your reflections? What, during the interview when we were talking, what was it that stood out for you? What was it that you reflected on? I would love to hear what you'd have to say about that. And you can leave comments over at starkreflections.ca, or as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, tag me on some of the various social medias. I love hearing what you're reflecting. I love resharing that with the community, because we're all, like I said earlier, in this together. I want to thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this interview. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with somebody that you think would find value in that wonderful conversation, or even the conversation plus the reflections that I've tagged onto it. You can leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Those things do help. But also, you being there and you listening to this podcast definitely helps me. So thanks for letting me bend your ear. So, as I said, this is the end of this episode. Thank you so much for listening. Until next week, and until next episode, this is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre, wishing you, dear listener, great writing and good Stark reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.